Who was Plato? Born in the year 429 to 428 BCE, Plato, by all extent and purpose, is one of the most important writers in Western literature and one of the most, if not the most influential author in the history of philosophy. You see, without Plato, we don't have much of Socrates, the father of Western philosophy itself. And because of the nature of his writings, dialogues, as whether the individual he's actually writing about is the one talking to you, the reader, not Plato, the author. Sometimes we don't quite certainly know when Socrates ends and Plato begins, and vice versa. My name is Jenner Elias, and this is Historicity, a channel in which we cover the constant called time, the good and the bad, in hopes of learning not to repeat the mistakes of the past. His real name was Aristocles, and Plato, his nickname, derives from the broad shoulders and chest, for out of the many things he practiced, he was also a prominent wrestler. His father was Ariston, an Athenian aristocrat who claimed to have descended from Cadmus, the founder of Thebes, credited with bringing the Phoenician alphabet and writing to Greece. And his mother, Perictone, was a distant descendant of the great Solon, the lawgiver. Now, because of his family status, he was afforded the best education at the time. His teachers were many. You had Metellus of Agrigentum, who taught him music and mathematics, Draco, the son of Damon, who taught him how to paint and draw. He also learned wrestling and martial arts from Ariston of Argos, and philosophy from Cratylus the Heraclean. Based on what he learned, he started writing poetry and drama and achieved some success. It is said that young Aristocles even went as far as to submit work for consideration for the prize at the theater of Bacchus. As a young man and one fit for combat, it's quite possible he would have served in the later stages of the Peloponnesian War against Sparta, as he was being groomed for a career in politics. But an event that took place when he was just 20 years old would change all of that, and he would shun all political and artistic aspirations and devote his entire life to the pursuit of philosophy, the pursuit of wisdom. At the age of 20, around the year 407 BCE, unlike most aristocratic Athenian youth during his day, young Aristocles ran to the agora and flocked to listen to a wandering wise man who would roam the streets of Athens, demonstrating his wisdom and challenging everyone's true knowledge and virtue with a curious questioning method. The man was none other than Socrates. Aristocles was smitten. Profound was the experience of listening to the wise words of the philosopher, that he went home and, summoning the gods of the earth, burned all his plays and poems and became a follower of Socrates. He wouldn't spend much time as a pupil of Socrates, only 8 years, until Socrates' execution by the city of Athens in the year 399 BCE. But these short 8 years marked his life forever and would serve as the foundation for all his future work. At the age of 29, after Socrates' death, Aristocles, now Plato, left Athens like many of Socrates' followers. The main reason being that now, with the great philosopher dead, many of his followers would quite likely face similar charges if they kept on spreading his and their own philosophical ideas. It is said that Plato traveled to Megara in Syracuse, Italy, to the house of his friend Euclid, who was also a follower of Socrates and who was actually present at Socrates' execution. As a matter of fact, according to Plato's own writings, Euclid was the first to write down the dialogues between Socrates and Theaetetus. And there, also along with many other friends, all philosophers who had fled Athens after the death of Socrates, Euclid founded the Megarian school of philosophy, something which would serve as inspiration to Plato's future endeavors, for greatness is never actually created in a vacuum. Euclid preached ideas in the realm of philosophy that border on theology, and in understanding his arguments, we can see why Socrates was accused of promoting gods other than those sanctioned by the state, if he harbored more or less similar ideas. For to Euclid, goodness, which for Socrates would have been virtue, is one and is called by many names: one time prudence, another time God, sometimes mind, and so on. Plato would spend several years with Euclid, and it is thought that it was here, surrounded by friends whose memories of Socrates were still fresh, where he started writing his famous dialogues. Then Plato in 393 BCE, we can't tell with finite certainty, left Megara for Egypt and studied in ancient Egypt under the Horite priest Secnufis. And it must be pointed out that this is a pre-Hellenic Egypt. This is not an Egypt yet influenced by the Hellenic Greek world. It is an Egypt before Alexander the Great. He lived in that Egypt for 13 years, breathing, infusing his knowledge and understanding of the world with Egypt's ancient knowledge and traditions. One of which quite possibly was the story of Atlantis. For according to Critias, one of Plato's characters, he learned about it from his grandfather, who in turn learned about it from Solon, the great statesman, who heard about it from an Egyptian priest who said Atlantis had existed 9,000 years ago. Then Plato moved to Libya and then crossed to Syracuse, where he tried to convince Dionysius the Elder to become the great philosopher king to no avail. Finally, in the year 380 BCE, he returned back to Athens to continue living there. Upon his return to Athens, after having learned in the many institutions founded by many other scholars he visited around the world, Plato decided to create his own. The grounds on which he built it were first a public grove of olive trees dedicated to Athena by religious groups who worshipped there. Then the olive tree garden was dedicated to Academus, a local hero who, according to legend, saved Athens from the loss of Theseus for Helen. That Helen, the one who became famous for the downfall of Troy. And finally, the olive tree grove served as a gymnasium. At first, Plato would deliver his lectures there to an exclusive group of senior and junior intellectuals. He would name Hecademia. Then, with time, a business model emerged, and the rest is history. Secondary institutions around the world would be built upon his idea. He started first teaching by himself, holding lectures, dialogues, and conversations. Then he employed scholars in all sorts of subjects, among them mathematics, natural science, astronomy, dialectics, philosophy, and politics. This is the time period in which it is believed he wrote the Laws and Timaeus, works which deal with laws, mathematics, and natural science, and which, because of their length and complexity, reflect a more mature approach when compared to his previous writings. In the year 367 BCE, his most famous pupil would enter the doors of the academy. He was Aristotle of Stagira, and he was eager to learn. He would remain at the academy for 20 years, learning and applying all the knowledge he could gain until his teacher's death. Plato possessed a variety of ideas in many realms and subjects. First, his theory of forms, which is at the heart of Platonism, presents us with an almost theological explanation of the world and reality. In his understanding of reality, reality is unavailable to those who just rely on their senses. He believed that reality really existed beyond the realm of what you can see, touch, or feel. And in order for him to explain the concept, he employed the allegory of the cave in his book, The Republic. In it, Socrates as a character states to Glaucon that reality is like what a group of prisoners stuck in a cave since birth would experience, with no knowledge of the world outside. These fictional prisoners are chained against the wall with their backs turned to a flame and unable to turn their heads. When things or people pass by the fire, those things cast a shadow on a wall in front of the prisoners. So they, the prisoners, only get to see the world and all its forms, all the objects and animals, through the shadow they cast on the wall. At first they name and classify the shadows, believing that they are actually interacting with the real form of those entities. Suddenly, in the allegory, one of the prisoners is free from his chains and he is able to wander outside and perceive the real world. At first, the sunlight hurts his eyes. The world is disorienting to him. When told that things around him are real while shadows are nothing but reflections, he cannot believe it. The shadows appear clearer to him than the real world, while the real world is still confusing. But eventually, little by little, his eyes begin to adjust and he starts recognizing the subtleties in nature. He finally starts seeing reflections and shadows for what they are. Then he returns to the cave to enlighten his fellow prisoners on the world he has just seen and the real nature of reality. But they in turn find him to be mad, crazed, a man who has lost his touch with reality. He tries to free them and they, really uncomfortable, or at least comfortable with the chains they have, their shackles, reject him violently. In addition to using the allegory of the cave as a way to explain forms and reality and the interaction of the public with philosophy, he also used the concept of forms, which he wrestled with for many years and over many of his writings, to explain the perception of what he thought of as the human soul. Plato believed that the soul is eternal. He believed that the soul existed before it entered the body in the realm of eternal forms. He believed that we are able to recognize a tree as a tree or a mountain as a mountain because our soul knows or knew the true forms of tree and mountain in that place of eternal forms. What we experience in this world is only a reflection of the true forms which are in that realm where bodiless souls exist. This seems strange to us today because we think that something exists because we see, taste, touch, hear, or smell it. But while our senses suggest that something exists in the temporal realm with us, the senses don't explain how we recognize the essence of that object. Plato argued that we are able to re-know or recognize the essence of an object because the soul knew it first as an eternal form. If I may, that reminds me of the Egyptian concept of existence, the Book of the Dead, and life and death in the afterlife. So you can see more or less how his Western philosophical ideas are being expanded and shaped by coming in contact with a North African Egyptian culture. Politically, Plato was concerned with the effects of celebrity on popular culture and how they influence public's ideas, outlook, and conduct. He wanted to replace those famous members of his society with a group he called the Guardians, made up of ideally wise and good people. He also had a particular dislike for democracy, like Socrates, his teacher, and blamed it for giving the world substandard rulers. Instead, he believed that city-states and countries should be governed by philosopher kings, which quite possibly was also an idea first sponsored by Socrates. In his life, Plato wrote 35 dialogues and 13 letters or epistles, and his work has become the fabric upon which our understanding of Western philosophy, culture, and religion is built. He's influenced politicians, artists, athletes, and religious leaders, including Paul of Tarsus, who would write most of the New Testament and would base his understanding of Jewish religious texts and the life of his Lord and Savior Jesus of Nazareth through a purely Platonist prism. Jesus as symbol, reality, true form beyond what we can merely touch or see. In other words, Plato is responsible for the duality of Jesus as God, the true form in the world that we cannot see, and man, the form with the world that humans interacted with. Professor Forrest Baird writes that there are few books in Western civilization that have had the impact of Plato's Republic aside from the Bible, perhaps none. And Alfred North Whitehead, the celebrated 20th century philosopher, summarizes Plato's importance to Western philosophy in a single sentence. He states the safest general characterization of the European philosophical tradition is that it consists of a series of footnotes to Plato. Aristocles of Athens, also known as Plato, would die in the year 347 BCE, but not before changing our understanding of the world and reality forever. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and click the bell so that every time that there's a new video, you can be immediately informed. Also, come on, subscribe if you haven't already. I'm General Elias, and this is history.